What if everything you've been taught about winning is wrong? What if the most powerful victories come not from crushing your opponents, but from stepping back when everyone expects you to step forward? Tonight, I'm going to share 3 stories that will challenge everything you believe about success, competition, and human nature. These aren't fairy tales or motivational speeches. They're real accounts of people who discovered something the ancient Japanese have known for centuries. Sometimes, the only way to truly win is to be willing to lose. Story 1. The Silk Road Gambit. The email that would change Marcus Chen's life arrived at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, marked with the red urgent flag that made his stomach clench. 12 hours later, he found himself on a plane to Shanghai, clutching a briefcase containing documents that could either save his company or destroy everything he had built over the past 15 years. Marcus had started Meridian Trading as a small textile import business in his garage in Portland. Now 15 years later, it was a multi-million-dollar operation with offices in 7 countries. But success had made him arrogant, and arrogance had led him into the most dangerous negotiation of his career. The crisis began 3 months earlier when Li Wei, CEO of Dragon Silk Industries, China's largest silk manufacturer, had contacted Meridian with an exclusive distribution deal. The terms were extraordinary: sole rights to distribute Dragon Silk products across North America for 5 years, with profit margins that would triple Meridian's annual revenue. Marcus should have been suspicious. In international trade, deals that seem too good to be true usually are. But the numbers were intoxicating, and his board of directors was pressuring him to expand aggressively. They had signed the preliminary agreement without conducting proper due diligence. The trap became apparent when Marcus discovered that Dragon Silk was simultaneously negotiating with 3 other American distributors, playing them against each other to drive down commission rates. Worse, Li Wei had been spreading rumors in the industry that Meridian was financially unstable, hoping to pressure Marcus into accepting even more unfavorable terms. Now, as Marcus's plane descended through the smog-shrouded sky of Shanghai, he knew he was walking into a battle he couldn't win through conventional means. Li Wei held all the cards: the exclusive product line, the manufacturing capacity, and the political connections in China that Marcus lacked. The Dragon Silk headquarters occupied an entire city block in Shanghai's financial district, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that seemed to pierce the polluted sky. Marcus was escorted to the 40th floor, where Li Wei waited in a conference room decorated with ancient Chinese landscape paintings and modern Italian furniture. Li Wei was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 45, with silver-rimmed glasses and the soft features of someone who had never known physical hardship. He spoke perfect English with a slight British accent, the result of an Oxford education. "Mr. Chen," Li Wei said, rising from his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to Shanghai. I trust your flight was comfortable?" Marcus had prepared for this moment during the 14-hour flight, rehearsing his strategy like a chess player, memorizing opening moves. He had planned to be aggressive, to call out Li Wei's duplicitous tactics and demand better terms. He had intended to fight fire with fire. Instead, something his grandmother had told him 30 years ago echoed in his mind. She had been teaching him Go, the ancient board game that had consumed his childhood afternoons. "Sometimes, Marcus," she had said in her broken English, mixing Mandarin phrases with American slang, "the winner is the one who knows when to lose." In Chinese, We say tui hibuhai kuotian kong. Step back, and you'll find a broader sky. Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct his business school training had instilled in him. Mr. Lee, he said, settling into his chair and setting his briefcase aside without opening it. I want to begin by acknowledging that you're in a superior position in these negotiations. You have the product we need, the manufacturing capacity we lack, and the market knowledge that comes from operating in your home country. I'm here not to fight you for better terms, but to understand how we can create a partnership that benefits you more than any of the other distributors you're considering. Li Wei's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He had clearly expected Marcus to come in swinging, demanding concessions and threatening to walk away. Instead, Marcus was doing something that rarely happened in high-stakes business negotiations. He was being completely honest about his weak position. "I'm listening," Li Wei said cautiously. Marcus spent the next hour doing something that violated every negotiation principle he had ever learned. Instead of advocating for his own company's interests, he focused entirely on understanding Dragon Silk's challenges and goals. He asked detailed questions about their production capacity, their expansion plans, their concerns about the American market. He learned that Dragon Silk was under pressure from the Chinese government to increase exports and create jobs in rural manufacturing regions. He discovered that Li Wei's previous partnerships with American distributors had failed because the Americans focused only on maximizing their own profits, without considering the cultural and regulatory challenges Dragon Silk faced in the US market. Most importantly, Marcus realized that Li Wei was personally staking his reputation on the success of this American expansion. If the partnership failed, Li Wei's position within his own company would be in jeopardy. "Mr. Lee," Marcus said after listening for nearly 2 hours without making a single demand, "I have a proposal that might sound unusual. Instead of negotiating for the highest possible commission rate, I'd like you to offer me the lowest rate you're comfortable with. In exchange, I want to make commitments to you that none of your other potential partners can match." Li Wei leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new interest. What kind of commitments? Marcus opened his briefcase for the first time and pulled out a folder of documents he had prepared during the flight. "First, I want to guarantee you minimum order volumes that are 20% higher than what we originally discussed. Second, I want to establish a joint marketing fund where Meridian contributes twice as much as Dragon Silk to promote your products in the American market. Third, I want to create a cultural exchange program where your employees can spend time in our American offices and our employees can work here in Shanghai to better understand your operations." Li Wei was silent for a long moment, flipping through the documents Marcus had provided. The numbers were extraordinary. Marcus was essentially offering to subsidize Dragon Silk's entry into the American market, accepting significantly lower profits for his own company in exchange for guaranteed volume and partnership stability. "Mr. Chen," Li Wei said finally, "this is not what I expected. These terms are very generous to us, perhaps too generous. Why would you make such an offer?" Marcus had rehearsed this answer during the flight, but sitting in the conference room with Li Wei, he decided to abandon his prepared speech and speak from the heart. "Because I've learned that the most successful partnerships are those where both parties feel they're getting more than they deserve," Marcus said. "If I negotiate hard for the best possible terms for Meridian, you'll spend the next 5 years looking for ways to reduce our commission or replace us with a different distributor. But if you feel like you're getting an exceptional deal, you'll want to protect and nurture our partnership." Marcus paused, looking out the window at the sprawling city below. "My grandmother taught me to play Go when I was a child. She used to say that the best way to control the center of the board is sometimes to give your opponent small victories around the edges. I'm willing to give you the victory in this negotiation because I believe it will lead to something much bigger for both of us. The meeting lasted 6 more hours. They broke for lunch, during which Li Wei introduced Marcus to his management team and spoke enthusiastically about Meridian's collaborative approach. By late afternoon, they had hammered out a deal that gave Dragon Silk significantly better terms than Marcus had originally planned to accept. But something unexpected happened during those negotiations as Marcus consistently prioritized Dragon Silk's interests alongside his own. Li Wei began reciprocating. He offered Meridian exclusivity in product categories that hadn't been part of the original discussion. He provided access to Dragon Silk's research and development team, allowing Meridian to have input on new products before they reached the market. Most surprisingly, he offered to introduce Marcus to other Chinese manufacturers who could provide complementary products, essentially helping Meridian build a comprehensive Asian supply chain. The contract they signed that evening was unlike anything Marcus had negotiated before. On paper, Meridian's profit margins were lower than in the original proposal. In reality, the additional product lines, R&D access, and supplier connections created opportunities worth tens of millions of dollars. 6 months later, Marcus was back in Shanghai, but this time Li Wei met him at the airport personally. The Dragon Silk partnership had exceeded both companies' projections. Meridian's revenues had increased by 400%, and Dragon Silk had captured 30% of the premium silk market in North America. Marcus, Li Wei said over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Huangpu River, "I must tell you something. Before our first meeting, I had decided to work with Morrison Textiles from New York. They offered me the highest commission rates and promised the most aggressive marketing campaign." Marcus nearly choked on his wine. Morrison Textiles was Meridian's biggest competitor, a company with twice the resources and established relationships throughout Asia. "What changed your mind?" Marcus asked. Li Wei smiled, pouring more wine into Marcus's glass. "You did something in that first meeting that no other American businessman has ever done with me. You listened more than you spoke. You asked about my challenges before presenting your solutions. Most importantly, you offered to lose so that I could win. In Chinese business culture, that kind of gesture creates guanxi, a relationship bond that goes deeper than any contract." Li Wei raised his glass in a toast. "To Makaru Gakachi," he said, pronouncing the Japanese phrase carefully. "I learned this concept from a Japanese business partner. Sometimes losing is winning." Marcus raised his own glass, thinking of his grandmother and her Go lessons. "To partnerships that make everyone feel like they're winning," he replied. The Dragon Silk deal became the foundation for Meridian's transformation from a regional textile importer to a global trading company. Over the next 5 years, Li Wei introduced Marcus to manufacturers throughout Asia, helped him navigate complex regulatory requirements, and even invested in Meridian's expansion into European markets. When Marcus eventually sold Meridian Trading for $200 million, he retained Li Wei's friendship and business partnership. They started a new venture together, a cross-cultural consulting firm that helps Western companies build authentic relationships in Asian markets. The lesson Marcus learned in that Shanghai conference room became the cornerstone of his business philosophy. In negotiations, in partnerships, and in life, sometimes the greatest victory comes from being willing to lose. By accepting smaller profits in the short term, he had gained something infinitely more valuable: a partnership built on mutual respect and shared success. The Japanese concept of Makiru Gakachi had transformed not just a business deal, but an entire approach to building relationships across cultures. Sometimes Marcus realized the best way to win everything is to be willing to lose anything. Sarah Martinez knew she was about to make the biggest mistake of her coaching career, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Standing on the sidelines of the state championship soccer match, watching her daughter Emma struggle to keep up with players who had twice her natural ability, Sarah faced a choice that would define not just the game, but their relationship forever. The Riverside Rapids had made it to the state finals through a combination of exceptional teamwork, relentless training, and Sarah's innovative coaching strategies. As the head coach of this under-14 girls soccer team, Sarah had built something special over the past 3 years. These weren't the most talented players in the state, but they were the most determined. Emma Martinez was the exception that proved the rule. At 13, she was smaller than most of her teammates, slower than the competition, and possessed the kind of soccer skills that coaches politely called developing. She made the team for one reason only. She was the coach's daughter, and youth soccer politics demanded that coaches' children be included on the roster. Sarah had agonized over this arrangement for 3 seasons. Every other parent on the team had invested thousands of dollars in private coaching, elite camps, and specialized training for their daughters. Their children deserved a coach who made decisions based purely on merit, not family relationships. Yet Emma loved soccer with a passion that broke Sarah's heart and inspired her coaching philosophy. The championship game against the Metro City Meteors had been brutal. The Meteors were everything the Rapids were not. Tall, fast, and technically skilled. They had recruited players from across the metropolitan area, offering families incentives to switch clubs and allegiances. Their coach, Derek Thompson, was a former professional player who treated 13-year-old girls like World Cup athletes. With 15 minutes remaining in the second half, the Rapids trailed 2-1. Sarah's carefully constructed game plan was falling apart. The Meteors' superior speed and skill were wearing down her players, and several of her starters were showing signs of exhaustion and frustration. Standard coaching wisdom dictated that Sarah should substitute her strongest players into the game, removing the weakest links to give her team the best chance of scoring an equalizing goal. Emma, who had played only 10 minutes in the first half, was sitting on the bench next to Sarah, stretching her legs and mentally preparing for what everyone assumed would be another brief appearance. The problem was that Emma wasn't just the weakest player on Sarah's roster. She might have been the weakest player on the field. In 3 years of competitive soccer, she had scored exactly 1 goal, and that was because the opposing goalkeeper had slipped in the mud. She had good field vision and worked harder than anyone else during practice. But youth soccer at this level was increasingly about raw athletic ability, and Emma simply didn't possess it. Sarah looked down the bench at her other substitutes. Jessica Rodriguez was her fastest player, a natural winger who could create scoring opportunities through pure speed. Amanda Chen was her most technical player. With ball skills that rivaled much older competitors, either of them represented a logical substitution that might help the Rapids equalize. Instead, Sarah found herself thinking about a conversation she'd had with Emma the night before the championship game. They were sitting in their kitchen after dinner, Emma carefully cleaning her soccer cleats while Sarah reviewed game film on her laptop. "Mum," Emma had said without looking up from her cleats, "I know I'm not as good as the other girls." Sarah had started to offer the parental reassurance that coaches and mothers are supposed to provide, but Emma continued before she could speak. "It's okay," Emma said. "I know I only make the team because you're the coach. But I want you to know that playing soccer with these girls has been the best part of my life. Win or lose tomorrow, I'm grateful for every minute I've been able to be part of this team." Now, watching the championship slip away, while Emma sat beside her on the bench, Sarah remembered something her own father had told her when she was Emma's age. He had been her basketball coach in a small town in New Mexico, and she had been good enough to earn her playing time through merit rather than family connections. Sarah, he had said after a particularly difficult loss, there are two kinds of victories in sports. There are the ones that show up on the scoreboard, and there are the ones that show up in people's hearts. The scoreboard victories fade after a few years, but the heart victories last forever. At the time, she had dismissed her father's philosophy as the consolation prize coaches offer when they can't deliver championships. Now, 30 years later, she understood what he had been trying to teach her. Sarah called a timeout with 12 minutes remaining in the championship game. Her players gathered around her, sweat-soaked and exhausted, but still fighting. "Girls," she said, loud enough for Emma to hear from the bench. "We're going to make a substitution. Emma, you're going in for Jessica." The announcement created a moment of stunned silence. Jessica Rodriguez was their leading scorer, and removing her from a championship game when the team desperately needed goals violated every competitive instinct Sarah possessed. "Coach," Jessica said carefully, "are you sure? I feel fine. I can keep playing." Sarah looked at Jessica, then at the other players gathered around her. These girls had followed her leadership for 3 years, trusting her decisions, even when they didn't understand the strategy. They deserved an explanation. "Jessica, you've been brilliant today, and you'll be back in the game soon," Sarah said. "But right now, I need Emma's energy and her understanding of our defensive system. The Meteors are expecting us to get desperate and start making risky attacking plays. Instead, we're going to be patient and wait for our opportunity." It was a plausible tactical explanation, though everyone in the huddle knew it wasn't the real reason for the substitution. Sarah was sacrificing the team's best chance of winning the championship to give her daughter meaningful playing time in the biggest game of their young careers. Emma jogged onto the field with a mixture of excitement and terror that was visible from the stands. The parents in the Rapids section exchanged glances that ranged from supportive to skeptical. These families had invested enormous amounts of time and money in their daughter's soccer development, and they were watching their coach potentially sacrifice a state championship for family reasons. The Meteors immediately targeted Emma, sensing weakness. Their coach directed his players to attack down her side of the field, trying to exploit what they assumed was a defensive liability. For the first 5 minutes, the strategy seemed to be working. Emma was beaten several times by faster players, and the Rapids' goal came under sustained pressure. But something unexpected began to happen. Emma's limitations as an athlete were obvious, but her understanding of team defense was exceptional. She had spent 3 years watching from the bench, studying the game, and learning from her more talented teammates. When she couldn't win the ball through speed or skill, she positioned herself to force attackers into areas where her teammates could provide support. More importantly, Emma's presence on the field changed the energy of the entire team. Her teammates began communicating more, knowing they needed to help cover for her weaknesses. The Rapids started playing with the collective urgency and mutual support that had carried them through the playoffs. With 8 minutes remaining, Emma intercepted a pass that the Meteors midfielder had assumed would reach its target easily. She immediately played a simple pass to Amanda Chen, who launched a counter-attack that resulted in the Rapids' equalising goal. The crowd erupted, and Emma's teammates mobbed her, as if she'd scored the goal herself. In the coaching box, Derek Thompson screamed at his players for underestimating an opponent and allowing a crucial turnover. The game went to overtime, tied 2-2. Sarah kept Emma on the field, despite having faster and more skilled players available on the bench. The decision continued to puzzle opposing coaches and some of her own parents, but Emma's teammates had embraced her presence. They were playing inspired soccer, moving the ball with precision and defending with collective determination. In the second overtime period, with both teams exhausted and the championship hanging in the balance, Emma found herself in a position she'd dreamed about but never expected to experience. A clearance from the Meteors' defence bounced awkwardly in front of their goal, and Emma was the closest Rapids player to the loose ball. The Meteors' goalkeeper, who had dominated the game with her shot-stopping ability, came charging off her line to collect the ball. Emma, running at full speed, arrived at the same moment. The collision was inevitable and dramatic. Both players went down in a tangle of limbs, and the ball rolled slowly toward the empty goal. Amanda Chen, who had been trailing the play, slid into the goal mouth and pushed the ball across the line for the championship-winning score. The Rapids had won their first state title, and Emma had been directly involved in the decisive moment. In the celebration that followed, something remarkable happened. The Rapids players lifted Emma onto their shoulders alongside Amanda, the goalscorer. The parents who had initially questioned Sarah's substitution decisions were cheering as loudly as anyone. Even some of the Meteors players came over to congratulate Emma on her role in the winning play. Later, as the team posed for pictures with their championship trophy, Sarah found herself standing next to Derek Thompson, the Meteors coach. "I have to ask," Derek said quietly, "was putting your daughter in the game a coaching decision or a parenting decision?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "It was a decision about what kind of victory I wanted to pursue," she said finally. "We could have won the championship by playing our most talented players and making the safest tactical choices. But we won something bigger by playing with our hearts and supporting each other." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "In 10 years of coaching youth soccer, I've never seen anything like what your team did today. Your daughter changed the entire dynamic of the game, not because of her individual ability, but because of how her teammates responded to playing with her." The championship trophy sat in Sarah's office for years afterward, but it wasn't the most important prize she had won that day. Emma continued playing soccer through high school, never becoming a star, but always contributing her maximum effort and infectious enthusiasm. Her teammates from the Rapids remained close friends, bonded by the memory of a championship they had won together through mutual support rather than individual brilliance. More significantly, the other parents on the team began to understand what Sarah had been teaching through her coaching philosophy. Youth sports weren't just about developing athletic ability, they were about building character, fostering teamwork, and creating memories that would last long after the final whistle. The Japanese concept of makaru ga kachi had found its way into a soccer field in suburban America. By choosing to lose, to sacrifice tactical advantage for the sake of inclusion and team chemistry, Sarah had won something far more valuable than a championship trophy. She had demonstrated that sometimes the greatest victory comes from being willing to put relationships and character development ahead of winning at all costs. Emma went on to study sports psychology in college and eventually became a youth coach herself, carrying forward the lesson her mother had taught her on that championship afternoon. In her coaching philosophy, she always remembered that the most important victories are often invisible on the scoreboard, but clearly visible in the hearts of the players who experience them. Story 3. The Gallery of Second Chances. The accusation arrived on a Thursday morning via certified mail, and by Friday afternoon, Catherine Chen's marriage of 18 years was hanging by a thread so thin she could practically hear it beginning to snap. Standing in the living room of their Victorian home in San Francisco's Richmond district, holding a gallery opening invitation that had somehow become evidence of betrayal, she realized that winning this argument might cost her everything she truly cared about. The invitation was innocent enough: thick, cream-coloured cardstock announcing the opening of Transitions, Contemporary, Perspectives on Loss and Renewal at the Morrison Gallery in Soma. Catherine's name was printed in elegant script as one of the featured artists, alongside 5 other photographers whose work explored themes of change and healing. For Catherine, who had been trying to rebuild her photography career, after 15 years of prioritising family over art, the exhibition represented a dream finally within reach. For her husband David, the invitation represented something entirely different. Transitions, David said, holding the invitation between them like a piece of evidence in a criminal trial. Loss and renewal, how perfectly appropriate for someone who's been planning her escape for months. Catherine set down her coffee cup carefully, using the small gesture to buy herself time to think. David's accusations weren't entirely wrong. She'd been feeling trapped, suffocated by the routine of suburban motherhood and a marriage that had slowly evolved into a business partnership focused on managing schedules and paying bills. But she hadn't been planning an escape. She had been planning a resurrection. The problem was that David couldn't see the difference. The fight had been building for weeks, ever since Catherine had started spending longer hours in the darkroom she'd set up in their garage. Their twin daughters, Sophie and Emma, were now 15 and increasingly independent, no longer requiring the constant maternal presence that had defined Catherine's life for the past decade and a half. For the first time since college, she had both the time and the creative energy to pursue photography seriously. David saw her renewed artistic passion as evidence of dissatisfaction with their life together. He interpreted every hour she spent developing film as time stolen from their family, every exhibition deadline as a step toward abandoning the responsibilities they had built together. Catherine, David continued, his voice carrying the precise, controlled tone he used during difficult business negotiations, we need to be honest about what's happening here. You're 43 years old, spending most of your free time with other artists, staying up late working on projects that take you further away from us. This isn't about photography. This is about you trying to recapture some version of yourself that existed before we got married. Catherine felt the familiar surge of defensive anger that had characterized their arguments for the past month. Every instinct told her to fight back, to point out the hypocrisy in David's accusation. He had never questioned his own right to pursue demanding career goals that required travel, long hours, and professional relationships that sometimes excluded family. As a software architect for a major tech company, he had built a successful career that she had supported without complaint, managing their household and children's schedules around his professional ambitions. Now that she was trying to rebuild her own creative identity, he was treating it as a betrayal of their marriage vows. Catherine had prepared for this conversation during the sleepless nights when David's cold silence had filled their bedroom like fog. She had rehearsed arguments about gender inequality, about the sacrifices she had made, about her right to pursue meaningful work outside of motherhood. She had compiled examples of his professional choices that had required family sacrifices, ready to present them as evidence of his double standard. But standing in their living room, looking at the man she had loved for nearly 2 decades, Catherine remembered something her grandmother had told her during their last conversation before her death 5 years earlier. Grandmother Chen had been a traditional Chinese woman who had immigrated to America with her husband in the 1960s, but she had possessed a wisdom about relationships that transcended cultural boundaries. During that final conversation, as Catherine sat beside her hospital bed, her grandmother had spoken about the difference between being right and being wise. Catherine, she had said in Mandarin, which Catherine translated in her mind as she remembered. In a marriage, You can win every argument and still lose your husband. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping the other person feel heard, even when they're wrong about what they're hearing. Now, facing the most important argument of her marriage, Catherine made a decision that went against every feminist principle and personal boundary she had developed over the past 15 years of feeling undervalued and overlooked. "David," she said, setting the gallery invitation aside and moving closer to where he stood by their living room window, "you're right to be concerned. I have been changing, and I haven't done a good job of helping you understand what those changes mean for us." David's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing the defensive anger he had been carrying into the fight. He had clearly expected Catherine to argue, to defend her choices and attack his position. Instead, she was acknowledging his concerns and taking responsibility for the communication breakdown between them. "I want to understand what you're feeling," Catherine continued, "because I think there's something important happening that we're both missing." David was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at their garden, where they had spent countless weekend hours together over the years, planting roses and vegetables and teaching their daughters to appreciate growing things. "I feel like I'm losing you," he said finally, his voice softer than it had been in weeks. "Not to another person, but to this version of yourself that doesn't seem to need our family the way the Catherine I married needed us." Catherine felt her heart break a little, recognizing the fear and vulnerability that David had been hiding behind his accusations and demands. He wasn't trying to control her artistic ambitions. He was trying to understand whether those ambitions meant she was outgrowing their life together. "David," she said, moving to stand beside him at the window, "what if I told you that this exhibition isn't about me moving away from our family, but about me becoming someone who can contribute more to it?" She spent the next hour doing something she had never done before in their marriage. Instead of defending her own needs and desires, she focused entirely on understanding and addressing his fears. She asked him to describe specific moments when he had felt her pulling away. She listened to his concerns about their daughters feeling abandoned by a mother who was suddenly pursuing interests outside their family sphere. Most importantly, she acknowledged that her excitement about photography might have made her less attentive to the emotional needs of the people she loved most. The conversation revealed things about their marriage that months of fighting had never brought to the surface. David admitted that his objections to Catherine's photography career were partially driven by his own regret about professional choices that had required him to miss important family moments. He was afraid that if Catherine became successful as an artist, she would experience the same kind of career obsession that had made him a less present father during their daughter's early years. Catherine realized that her enthusiasm for artistic independence had been so focused on her own liberation that she had failed to consider how her family might interpret her emotional distance during the creative process. She had been so eager to reclaim her individual identity that she had inadvertently suggested her role as wife and mother had been inadequate or unfulfilling. "David," Catherine said, as their conversation began to wind down, "I want to make you an offer that might sound crazy." David looked at her with the cautious interest of someone who had been surprised once already during a difficult conversation. "I want to withdraw from the Morrison Gallery exhibition," Catherine said. The words felt like glass in her throat. The exhibition represented 2 years of preparation, networking, and artistic development. It was her first real opportunity to display her work in a respected gallery, and withdrawing would likely damage her relationships with the curator and other artists involved. But as Catherine spoke the words, she realized that sacrificing the exhibition might save something infinitely more valuable than her artistic career. "Catherine?" "No," David said immediately. "I don't want you to give up the exhibition. That's not what this fight was about." "Then what was it about?" Catherine asked. David was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. I think it was about me being afraid that your success would make you realise you didn't need me anymore, and maybe about you being afraid that my concerns meant I didn't want you to succeed. Catherine nodded, recognising the truth in his analysis. What if we tried a different approach to both of those fears? Over the next few hours, Catherine and David had the most honest conversation about their marriage they had shared in years. They talked about the ways their relationship had changed as their daughters had become more independent, and how they had both been struggling to redefine their roles as partners rather than just co-parents. Catherine explained that her photography wasn't an escape from their family. It was an attempt to bring more creativity and passion into her life so she could be a more fulfilled wife and mother. David admitted that his concerns about her artistic ambitions were partly motivated by jealousy over her ability to pursue new challenges, while his career had become routine and predictable. By the end of their conversation, Catherine had decided not to withdraw from the exhibition, but to approach it differently. Instead of treating her photography career as a separate sphere of her life, she began including David and their daughters in the process. She asked David to help her select which photographs to display, drawing on his visual design background from his software work. She invited Sophie and Emma to the gallery opening, making it a family celebration rather than a professional milestone she was achieving alone. Most importantly, Catherine began talking to David about her artistic process, the same way she talked to him about other aspects of their shared life. She showed him works in progress, asked for his opinions on creative decisions, and included him in the emotional journey of building a photography career. The Morrison Gallery exhibition was a success that exceeded Catherine's expectations. 3 of her photographs sold on opening night, and she received inquiries from 2 other galleries about future shows. But the real victory was seeing David's pride as he introduced her to other guests as my wife, the photographer. 6 months later, David surprised Catherine by enrolling in a photography workshop himself. He had been inspired by watching her creative process and wanted to understand the artistic vision that had become such an important part of her life. "I realised something during all those arguments we had," David told her, as they walked through Golden Gate Park with their new cameras, looking for interesting light and composition. "I was so focused on defending what we had that I forgot about who we could become." Catherine thought about the Japanese concept her grandmother had taught her, makeru ga kachi, losing in order to win. By being willing to sacrifice the exhibition to save her marriage, she had created space for a deeper conversation that ultimately strengthened both her relationship and her artistic career. The gallery invitation that had nearly ended their marriage was now framed in their living room, next to a photograph David had taken of Catherine at work in her darkroom. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important victories come from being willing to lose an argument in order to win understanding. Catherine's photography career continued to flourish, but it developed within the context of a marriage that had been renewed through honest communication and mutual support. She never had to choose between being an artist and being a wife, because she had learned that the greatest art comes from authentic relationships, and the strongest relationships can accommodate individual growth and creativity. Years later, when their daughters faced their own relationship challenges, Catherine would tell them about the gallery invitation that almost destroyed their parents' marriage and the conversation that saved it. The lesson wasn't about sacrificing personal ambitions for family harmony, but about finding ways to honour both individual dreams and shared commitments. Sometimes, Catherine learned, the most profound victory comes from being willing to lose a battle in order to win a deeper understanding of what you're really fighting for.